Another news organization that is in a legal battle with the White House. We have the CEO and president of the AP, Daisy Veerasingham, who will be joining us on stage. Hi, Daisy.
Hi, how are you?
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
The last time Daisy and I saw each other, we were talking about AI. And it was fun to be able to have a conversation about innovation and not be bogged down in some of the crazy legal things happening. But I do want to start there because obviously there's been a lot of news stories in the past week about what's been happening with Donald Trump and lawsuits. And your situation is different. Donald Trump has waged 5 lawsuits against media companies in the past 2 years. What happened with the AP was the White House barred AP reporters from events. The AP sued the White House, which is different, and now you're in an appeal. My question for you, where does that case stand, and what do you expect to happen? Do you think this goes ultimately all the way to the Supreme Court? When do you think we're going to hear this?
Okay, so we actually stood on a principle which is a fundamental right protected under the American Constitution. You'll realize from my accent that I'm actually not American, I'm British, so it always seems a bit strange that I'm talking about this. And that is the right to report freely without retaliation. So yes, you're correct. It's currently being appealed. The decision is being currently appealed by the White House. That's still playing out and is in process. In terms of where does this go over the long term, I think it's really difficult to tell at this moment in time because it depends what happens with this appeal process at the moment. And we're very much focused on the outcome of that for the time being.
Elon Musk, other Trump allies have gone after the AP for its style guide. And I think that was what caused this rift in the first place. And I think one of the reasons that they target the AP is because the AP licenses so much content to newsrooms all around the world. It's one of the largest global news wires. Do you have concerns that even though this lawsuit was waged by you, that the Trump administration has you next on the block, that they're now going to go back and try to sue you for some sort of, whatever punitive measure it might be?
Look, I think we're all navigating very uncertain times, probably uncharted territory for most media organizations. The Style Book, look, the Style Book is something we produce. It's a way we're transparent. You're right, we serve thousands of customers around the world. We're a global organization. We operate in over 100 countries. That's the perspective we have to take. And the Style Book is about how we are transparent with our own customers. It's guidance for everybody else. They're free to follow it or not. And I think that's something that gets missed sometimes in the discussion. It's our guidance to our journalists, and you can follow it or you can choose not to.
Yes, in talking about that very global reach, one of the things that makes the AP unique is that it actually has the resources to put journalists on the ground in places like Gaza, in places like Russia, places that are hard to reach. In terms of Gaza, recently the IDF bombed areas in Gaza in which freelance media workers that worked for the AP were killed. The AP and Reuters sent a very strongly worded letter to Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli officials condemning it and asking for information about an investigation into what happened. Have you heard from them? And if you haven't, what's your next move?
So first of all, I'd just like to say that losing a member of our team is very tough. It's tough on the organization, and it's particularly tough on the team that works closely every single day on the ground. And they're working in very difficult circumstances. As many of you know, there are not many media organizations able to report out of Gaza at the moment. So yes, with Reuters, we did ask for an explanation as to what has happened. We are still in discussions, let's put it that way. We have not had a definitive answer for that. But I also want to be very clear, this is really important to us and we will continue to push for that.
Do you think that the IDF will engage with you in a fair way, or you think they're pushing you off?
I'm going to say we're still in discussion. So at the moment, I'm going to take them at their word that they are trying to give us an answer for what happened.
And in terms of the broader conversation around press safety, I think this has become a bigger issue as the hyper-polarized environment puts a lot of pressure on journalists. Like, what's the number one thing you are preparing for as we head into, another 3 years in this administration? Is it online harassment attacks? Is it keeping people safe on the ground? What is it?
It's a combination of both things. So I would say that we've come from a history where people's physical safety have often been the most important thing we've been dealing with. But in the last 5 years, people's psychological safety, how they're treated in social and digital, that has become just as important. We have a big team that work on safety at the AP, and they spend as much time on people's social safety, digital safety, as they do on their physical safety. But I would say also that where our safety resources were often concentrated outside of the United States, today, as much time and effort is spent on physical and digital safety in the United States as it is outside. And that would be the biggest shift I think we've seen.
Yeah, it follows a broader trend of more journalists being targeted in non-war zones and conflict zones. Let's pivot to innovation, because the AP, one of the oldest newsrooms, has a strong record of innovation. You were one of the first media companies in the world to strike a deal with OpenAI. And that deal gave OpenAI access to some of your journalism to use, to train off of, et cetera. You also are one of the only, if not the only, news organization to have a deal with Google. My question for you is, why do all these outlets want to work with the AP? What makes the AP so special?
Okay, so we established two principles right at the beginning of this, and the two principles are what's helped guide our decision making even to this day. And those two principles were: our intellectual property has to be protected. Why is that important? Because we put journalists on the front lines every single day. We've just talked about the huge number of risks that come with that, and that's why we have to protect our intellectual property, and we have to achieve a fair value for that. We're a licensing business, right? So we had a good framework for that. I think it is really important, where those two principles can be respected, that you get independent, fact-based and non-partisan journalism, information or content into the training of these algorithms. That is an absolute fundamental. We are talking about huge amounts of misinformation already, and that's only going to get exacerbated. And I do think that's one of the reasons they do want to work with us, because they understand the value.
Okay, the question, are you happy with these deals? Because you were one of the first to strike them, which means that now you've seen dozens of other news organizations come out with these crazy lucrative deals. Do you ever think, I wish I had waited and struck something better?
Sarah, we always look at every deal that becomes public and we back into it to make sure that we have established the same value. And if we haven't, we go back to them, believe me. So it's something we constantly monitor. And at this moment in time, I would say we're comfortable with that early mover position that we took.
And let's talk about local. So we've talked a lot about AP's international reach. On the local level, the AP, which by the way is a not-for-profit,
it is
different than a nonprofit. You have established a separate nonprofit to raise $100 million at the local level for initiatives. That was your goal. How close are you to that goal? How much have you raised?
Okay, so the reason we set up the APFJ was because there are huge parts of the United States that have huge news deserts that are not being served by journalism. And we felt that there was a moment here where we, given the role that we play, needed to lean into it. But it wasn't something we could do without philanthropic support. Okay, so like all people who run organizations, we set a goal. I set a goal. I was unspecific about the timeline, I will have to say that. But what I will say is, in the next couple of months, we'll announce some really big philanthropic support that is going towards the APFJ, which I'm really excited about. And therefore, we're well on track to reaching that 100 million goal. In fact, we're probably slightly further along than we thought we would be. And that's really good news, because that's a real lean in to helping a lot of non-profit newsrooms that are emerging, who are actually taking up the deserts that have been created and providing local news. And so now we're going to be able to help them, not just with journalism, but also with services.
Daisy, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.